The notification came 3 days before Easter. A simple text from my father, no greeting, no warmth. Just the message that had become familiar over the past decade. I wasn't welcome. I stared at my phone in my chambers, the mahogany desk reflecting the afternoon light filtering through the tall windows. Outside, Washington, D.C. bustled with its usual organized chaos. Inside, I felt the old familiar sting of dismissal, though by now it had dulled to a distant ache. My father had perfected the art of excluding me while making it sound reasonable. This time the excuse was my cousin Sarah's new husband, Marcus Whitmore. A federal judge, Dad had emphasized in previous calls. Important. Connected. Someone whose presence elevated the family's standing. And my presence apparently would diminish it. I set the phone down and returned to the brief I'd been reviewing. United States versus Riverside Development Corporation. A complex federal fraud case involving healthcare contracts. The kind of case that required precision, patience, and an understanding of both criminal and administrative law. The kind of case I'd been appointed to handle because of my reputation for fairness and my expertise in federal contracting law. But my father didn't know that. None of my family did. To them, I was still Lauren, the daughter who'd wasted her potential by working for the government instead of joining a prestigious law firm. The one who'd chosen public service over profit, principle over prestige. The family embarrassment who drove a modest car, lived in a small townhouse and wore conservative suits instead of designer labels. They had no idea that 10 years ago at 32, I'd been confirmed as a United States District Court judge for the District of Columbia. One of the youngest federal judges appointed in the past 2 decades. I hadn't hidden it exactly. I'd invited them to my confirmation hearing. My father had declined, citing a golf tournament. My mother had prior commitments. My sister Jessica came but left early, unimpressed by what she called government pageantry. Only my late grandmother had attended, sitting in the gallery with tears of pride streaming down her face. After that, I stopped trying to share my life with them. When they asked about work, I said cases and paperwork. When they dismissed my career as pushing papers for bureaucrats, I simply nodded. When my father introduced me at family gatherings as Lauren, she works for the courts, emphasizing it like an apology, I smiled politely. I wasn't hiding. I was watching. Every dismissive comment, every casual exclusion, every assumption that I'd failed because I hadn't followed their narrow definition of success. I observed it all. Not with bitterness, but with the same analytical eye I brought to the bench. My career had taught me patience. In federal court, you don't rush to judgment. You gather evidence. You listen to all sides. You wait for the full picture to emerge before making your ruling. So I waited. The text about Easter was just the latest in a pattern that had repeated throughout my adult life. Family weddings where I wasn't asked to be in the wedding party. Holiday gatherings where my achievements went unmentioned while my sister's corporate success was celebrated. Conversations where my opinions on legal matters were dismissed in favor of my brother-in-law's. He was a personal injury attorney whose largest case had been a slip-and-fall settlement. Last Thanksgiving, my father had actually interrupted me mid-sentence to ask my cousin's fiancé, Marcus, about a Supreme Court decision. Marcus had given a superficial answer pulled from cable news commentary. I could have explained the actual constitutional implications, the circuit split that led to the case, the nuanced reasoning in the majority opinion. I'd said nothing. Just smiled and passed the cranberry sauce. That was when Dad had announced that Marcus and Sarah were getting married. Finally, he'd said, beaming, someone in this family is connected to real power. A federal judge. Can you imagine? I could imagine. I lived it every day. Judge Anderson? My clerk, David, knocked softly on my chamber door. The Riverside Development case file is ready for tomorrow's hearing. Thank you, David. I accepted the file, noting its thickness. Has the defense filed their witness list? Just came in. Whitmore and Associates is representing the defendant. Marcus Whitmore himself is listed as lead counsel. My hand paused on the file. Marcus Whitmore? Yes, Judge. Apparently he's taking a high-profile case to raise his firm's visibility. The partner memo says he's looking to make a name beyond his judicial connections. I opened the file and scanned the defense team roster. There it was. Marcus Whitmore, J.D. Partner, Whitmore and Associates. My cousin Sarah's husband. The federal judge who wasn't actually a federal judge. I'd never corrected that misconception. When Dad had first mentioned Judge Whitmore, I'd assumed he meant a state court judge perhaps or a magistrate. But at Thanksgiving I'd overheard Marcus carefully deflecting questions about his cases, speaking in vague terms about the bench and rulings. It had taken me exactly 3 minutes of conversation to realize the truth. Marcus had been a clerk for a federal judge 15 years ago. He'd been working at the courthouse, but he'd never been a judge himself. He'd parlayed that brief association into a successful private practice, and somewhere along the way, my family had inflated his resume from former judicial clerk to federal judge. Marcus had never corrected them. In fact, from what I'd observed, he'd encouraged the confusion. He name-dropped his former judge, referenced his time on the bench in a way that was technically true. He had been present on the bench, just not sitting in the judge's chair, and let people draw their own conclusions. My family, always impressed by titles and status, had drawn exactly the conclusion Marcus intended. And now Marcus Whitmore, who my father considered too important for me to be around, was going to appear in my courtroom as defense counsel in a federal fraud case. I pulled the case summary. Riverside Development Corporation was accused of submitting falsified documentation to obtain $47 million in federal healthcare facility construction contracts. The government alleged systematic fraud, inflated qualifications, fabricated experience, forged certifications. It was exactly the kind of case that required a defense attorney with deep knowledge of federal contracting law and criminal procedure. Marcus's firm specialized in corporate litigation and white-collar defense, but his personal experience was mostly in civil matters. This case was going to be a challenge for him. I spent Sunday reviewing the briefs with my usual thoroughness. The prosecution's case was strong but not overwhelming. The defense had room to maneuver if they were strategic. Everything would depend on how well Marcus could argue the nuances of federal contracting regulations and criminal intent. By Sunday evening, I drafted my preliminary questions and reviewed the relevant precedents. I was ready. My phone buzzed. Another text from Dad. Hope you're enjoying a quiet Easter at home. Sarah and Marcus's brunch was wonderful. Marcus told such fascinating stories about his cases. So impressive to have someone of his caliber in the family. Wish you could have met him properly. I typed a simple response. Sounds lovely. What I didn't type. I'll see him tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. In my courtroom. Where he'll address me as Your Honor. Monday morning arrived with the crisp promise of spring. I drove to the courthouse in my standard vehicle, a practical sedan that my family had once mocked as so ordinary. I parked in my reserved space, marked Judge Anderson, and entered through the private judicial entrance. Security nodded respectfully. Good morning, Judge. Good morning, Tom. I took the judge's elevator to my chambers, changed into my robes and reviewed my calendar. United States versus Riverside Development Corporation was my first case. Scheduled for 9 a.m. A pretrial hearing on several defense motions to suppress evidence. At 8:55, David knocked. Courtroom is ready, Judge. Both parties are present. Thank you. I'll be right there. I gathered my notes, took a breath, and walked through the door that connected my chambers directly to the courtroom. All rise. The United States District Court for the District of Columbia is now in session, the Honorable Lauren Anderson presiding. I entered and took my seat at the bench, looking out over the courtroom with the practiced neutrality I'd perfected over a decade. The prosecution team sat at the left table, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Rebecca Chin, someone I knew to be thorough and prepared. At the defense table sat 3 attorneys in expensive suits, and in the center Marcus Whitmore. Our eyes met. His face went absolutely pale. I watched the recognition hit him in stages. First confusion, why did this judge look familiar? Then recognition, wait, that's Sarah's cousin. Then the devastating realization she's not just in the courthouse. She asked the judge. To Marcus's credit, he recovered quickly, though not quickly enough. His co-counsel had noticed his reaction. The lead prosecutor had noticed. The court reporter had noticed. I gave him nothing. No smile, no acknowledgement of recognition, no indication that we'd met before. Just the same professional neutrality I showed every attorney who appeared before me. Please be seated, I said. Counsel, please state your appearances for the record. Rebecca Chin stood. Rebecca Chin for the United States, Your Honor. Marcus stood. and I could see his hand trembling slightly as he gripped his notes. Marcus Whitmore for the defendant, Riverside Development Corporation, Your Honor. His voice caught slightly on Your Honor. Thank you, I said calmly. We're here for pretrial motions on the defense's motion to suppress evidence obtained during the initial investigation. Mr. Whitmore, you filed this motion. Please proceed with your argument. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, and glanced down at his papers. When he looked back up, I could see sweat forming at his hairline. This was the moment every judge learns to navigate with care. Personal connections cannot influence judicial decisions. The fact that Marcus was married to my cousin, the fact that my family valued him more than they valued me, the fact that he'd built a reputation on a title he'd never actually held. None of that could matter. What mattered was the law, the evidence, and the arguments presented. Marcus began his argument, and within 2 minutes, it was clear he was unprepared. He cited a case that had been overturned 3 years ago. He misstated the standard for suppression of evidence in federal criminal cases. He confused administrative law with criminal procedure. I let him finish, then asked a simple question. Counsel, you cited Patterson v. United States for the proposition that warrants require individualized probable cause for each document seized. Can you direct the court to that language in the opinion? Marcus fumbled with his papers. Your Honor, I believe it's in the majority opinion page. Patterson v. United States was overturned by the Supreme Court in Wilson v. Harris, I said evenly. 3 years ago. The current standard is established in Riverside. Interestingly, a case with the same name as your client, which held exactly the opposite. Were you aware of that? The courtroom went silent. Your Honor, you will need to supplement our brief. I would suggest you do so, I said. Additionally, your motion cites Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 41E, which was amended in 2019. The version you're citing is no longer in effect. Ms. Chin, does the government wish to respond? Rebecca Chin stood, and I could see her fighting back a smile. Your Honor, the government believes the defense's motion is based on superseded law and should be denied as filed. However, if the court wishes to allow supplemental briefing, I'll allow it, I said. Mr. Whitmore, you have until Friday to file a supplemental brief addressing the current state of the law. Ms. Chin, you'll have until the following Wednesday to respond. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. I addressed the rest of the procedural matters quickly and efficiently, then adjourned the hearing. All rise. I returned to my chambers, removed my robe, and sat at my desk. The hearing had lasted 20 minutes. In that time, I'd exposed the weakness of the defense's preparation, given them a chance to correct it, and maintained absolute professional neutrality. I'd also watched Marcus Whitmore realize that the family member he'd been helping to exclude from Easter brunch was the judge who would decide his case. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Marcus just called. He said you're the judge on his case? Why didn't you tell us you were a judge? 3 question marks. The text equivalent of shouting. I typed carefully. You never asked what I do. When you inquired, I said I work for the courts. That was accurate. Her response came immediately. Everyone thought you were a clerk or something. This is insane. Marcus is freaking out. He says this is a conflict of interest. I called my judicial assistant. Janet, I need you to prepare the standard disclosure form for a potential conflict of interest. Defense counsel in the Riverside case is married to my cousin. I'm going to disclose the relationship and allow both parties to state whether they want me to recuse. Right away, Judge. Within an hour, both parties had been notified of the family connection. Rebecca Chen's office filed a response stating the government had no objection to me remaining on the case. Marcus's firm requested an emergency conference call. At 3 p.m. I convened the call with both parties on the line. Mr. Whitmore, I said, you've requested this conference to address the disclosed family relationship. Please state your position for the record. Marcus's voice was strained. Your Honor, given that you're related to my wife and given that my family relationship with you is complicated, we believe there's an appearance of impropriety that warrants recusal. Please elaborate on what you mean by complicated, Mr. Whitmore. There was a long pause. What could he say? That my family excluded me from gatherings? That they considered me inferior? That he'd been held up as the success story while I was the cautionary tale? Your Honor, there's been limited contact between you and my wife's family. We're concerned about potential bias. I see. Ms. Chin, does the government have a position? Your Honor, the government notes that Judge Anderson has an impeccable reputation for fairness and impartiality. We have complete confidence in the court's ability to decide this case on its merits. We oppose recusal. Mr. Whitmore, I'm going to be very clear, I said. I have presided over hundreds of cases in this court. I have never allowed personal relationships to influence my judicial decisions, and I will not start now. The fact that you are married to my cousin is irrelevant to how I will rule on the legal issues in this case. However, if you genuinely believe I cannot be impartial, you have the right to request that I recuse myself. But I want you to understand that if I recuse, this case will be randomly reassigned to another judge in this district. You will not get to choose who hears your case. Do you wish to formally move for my recusal? Another long pause. Marcus knew what I knew. The other judges in the district were just as qualified and just as demanding. Some were more prosecution-friendly than I was. Some were known for being exceptionally hard on attorneys who came to court unprepared. I was actually one of the more balanced judges he could have drawn. Your Honor, Marcus finally said, we'll withdraw the request for recusal. Noted for the record. This conference is concluded. Both parties will comply with the briefing schedule I established this morning. And Mr. Whitmore, I expect your supplemental brief to cite current, applicable law. Yes, Your Honor. I ended the call and sat back in my chair. My phone was exploding with texts from family members. My mother. My sister Jessica. Even my father. I ignored them all and finished reviewing the rest of my cases for the week. That evening my father called. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. Lauren, this is your father. We need to talk about this situation with Marcus. He's extremely upset. You should have disclosed that you were a judge when you met him at Thanksgiving. This is very inappropriate. You're creating problems for the family. Call me back immediately. I deleted the message. Tuesday morning my mother called. I answered. Lauren Marie Anderson, what is going on? Hello, Mother. I'm well, thank you for asking. Don't be flippant. Marcus says you're a federal judge. Since when? Since my confirmation 10 years ago. You were invited to the ceremony. Wait. That government thing? I thought you were being sworn in as a clerk or something. A United States District Court judge, Mother. I sent you the formal announcement. It listed my title. Well, we didn't realize. That's not the point. The point is you're creating a conflict for Marcus. He's trying to make a name for himself and now you're presiding over his case? It looks like you're trying to sabotage him. I took a breath, maintaining the calm I'd learned to cultivate in the courtroom. Mother, Marcus is free to request that I recuse myself. I've already given him that option. He declined. Because the other judges might be worse. You need to recuse yourself anyway. Show some family loyalty. Family loyalty, I repeated softly. Like the family loyalty that excluded me from Easter brunch because my presence would be awkward around Marcus? Silence. Lauren, that was, your father thought. Mother, I have to go. I have oral arguments in 30 minutes. If you'd like to attend, the courtroom is open to the public. You're welcome to come watch what I do. I hung up before she could respond. The week continued. Marcus filed his supplemental brief on Friday. It was better than his original motion but still mediocre. He'd cited the correct cases this time, but his analysis was superficial. Rebecca Chen's response brief was sharp, thorough, and devastating. When we reconvened for the hearing, Marcus looked like he hadn't slept. His co-counsel did most of the arguing this time, a senior partner who clearly understood federal criminal procedure far better than Marcus did. I denied the motion to suppress. The evidence had been lawfully obtained. The defense had failed to meet their burden of proof. Mr. Whitmore, I said after issuing my ruling, I'm setting a trial date for 8 weeks from today. That gives both parties time to complete discovery and prepare their cases. I expect all future filings to meet the professional standards of this court. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. This hearing is adjourned. That evening my sister Jessica called. Unlike my parents, Jessica had always been more pragmatic than status conscious. Okay, she said without preamble. I need you to explain what's happening because Dad is losing his mind and honestly I'm confused too. What would you like to know? Are you actually a federal judge? Yes. Like a real one? Not a magistrate or a referee or something. A United States District Court judge. Article 3. Life tenure. Presidential appointment, Senate confirmation. Holy shit, Jessica breathed. When did this happen? 10 years ago. I was 32. And you just never mentioned it? I invited the family to my confirmation. Grandma was the only one who came. I heard her intake of breath. Oh my God. That ceremony where Grandma made us all promise to attend, but Dad said it was just some government paperwork thing. That ceremony. Lauren, I am so sorry. I thought we all thought. You thought I was a clerk. Or a secretary. Or just a government employee. I kept my voice gentle. It's fine, Jessica. I stopped correcting the assumptions years ago. It's not fine. We've been treating you like you're the family failure, I finished. I know. Meanwhile, you're one of the most powerful people in the federal judiciary, and we've been fawning over Marcus, who isn't even actually a judge. He was a clerk, I said. A good one from what I understand. He's built a successful practice. There's no shame in that. But he let us think. He did. And I let you keep thinking I was something less than I am. We both made choices about what to reveal and what to let people assume. Jessica was quiet for a moment. Are you going to destroy him in this trial? I'm going to be fair and impartial just as I am in every case. The law will be applied equally. Justice will be served based on the evidence and the arguments presented. Marcus will get the same consideration as any other attorney in my court. No more, no less. That's very judge-like of you. It's my job. Another pause. Dad wants you to recuse yourself. I know. I've offered Marcus that option twice now. He's declined both times. Because you're actually one of the fairer judges, aren't you? I'd like to think so. Lauren, I really am sorry. About Easter, about all of it. We should have paid more attention. We should have cared more about what you were actually doing instead of just assuming. Thank you, I said quietly. That means something. For what it's worth, I'd like to come watch the trial. If that's allowed. It's open to the public. You're welcome anytime. The trial began 6 weeks later. In that time, Marcus had clearly worked hard to prepare. He'd brought in 2 additional attorneys who specialized in federal criminal defense. They'd filed competent briefs, conducted thorough discovery, and prepared a reasonable defense strategy. But the government's case was strong. The evidence of fraud was extensive and well documented. Falsified certifications, fabricated experience, forged signatures. The paper trail was clear. The trial lasted 3 weeks. My courtroom was filled every day with the usual mix of law students, journalists covering federal cases, and interested observers. On the second day, I noticed my sister Jessica sitting in the gallery. She came back every day for the rest of the trial. On the 4th day, my mother appeared. She sat in the back, watching silently as I managed the complex proceedings, ruled on objections, instructed the jury, and maintained order in the courtroom. On the 8th day, my father came. I saw him enter during the afternoon session, taking a seat near the door. He watched as Marcus examined a witness, as Rebecca Chin cross-examined, as I sustained objections and overruled others based on the federal rules of evidence. He watched me work. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning a verdict. Guilty on 17 of 19 counts. Riverside Development Corporation had systematically defrauded the federal government of $47 million. I thanked the jury for their service, set a sentencing date, and adjourned the trial. In my chambers afterward, I removed my robe and sat quietly for a moment. The case had been decided fairly. The law had been applied correctly. Justice had been served. Marcus had represented his client competently, but the evidence had been overwhelming. He'd done his job. I'd done mine. My phone showed 14 missed calls from family members. I called Jessica first. You were incredible, she said immediately. Lauren, I had no idea. The way you managed that courtroom, the way you explained complex legal concepts to the jury, the respect everyone showed you, I'm honestly in awe. Thank you for coming. I brought Mom on day 4. Did you see her? I did. She cried afterward. Not in court but in the car. She said she finally understood what Grandma had been trying to tell us. My throat tightened. Grandma knew. She tried to tell us. We didn't listen. Jessica paused. Dad came on day 8. I saw him. He hasn't said anything yet. I think he's processing. That's all right. He doesn't have to say anything. But the next morning my father called. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Lauren. His voice was rough. I watched the trial. The end of it, anyway. Yes, I saw you there. I had no idea what you do. I mean, I knew you worked at the court, but I didn't understand what that meant. I didn't understand who you are. I waited. We excluded you from Easter because we thought Marcus was more important. More successful. More worthy of respect. He cleared his throat. I was wrong. We were all wrong. Dad. Let me finish. Please. You've been a federal judge for 10 years. One of the youngest ever appointed. You've presided over hundreds of cases. You literally hold the power to decide people's futures, to interpret the law, to deliver justice. And we thought you were filing papers. I do file a lot of papers, I said gently. That part was true. Lauren, I'm sorry. I'm sorry we didn't come to your confirmation. I'm sorry we didn't ask more about your work. I'm sorry we valued a title over actually knowing who you are and what you've accomplished. I'm sorry we missed 10 years of being proud of you. I felt tears prick my eyes. Thank you. Your mother and I would like to take you to dinner. To celebrate. To listen. To finally learn about your life. Would you be willing? I'd like that. And Lauren, Marcus asked me to tell you something. He said to tell you that you were the fairest judge he's ever practiced before, and if he ever has another federal case he hopes he draws your court. I smiled. That's kind of him. He also said to tell you that he's sorry for letting us believe he was a judge. He said you could have embarrassed him in open court, called out the misrepresentation, made him look foolish. But you didn't. You just treated him like any other attorney and judged his work on its merits. That's my job. No, my father said quietly. That's who you are. And we should have known that all along. 2 weeks later I had dinner with my parents. Jessica came too, and to my surprise so did Marcus and Sarah. We sat in a private room at a restaurant near Capitol Hill. For the first time in a decade my family asked me questions about my work. What cases had been most challenging? What was the confirmation process like? What made me want to become a judge? I told them about my love for the law, my commitment to justice, my belief that the courts should be a place where everyone, rich or poor, powerful or powerless, receives equal treatment. Marcus listened quietly, then said, I owe you an apology, Lauren. I let your family believe I was a federal judge when I was only a former clerk. I was embarrassed to correct them, and then it seemed too late. But watching you work, seeing what an actual federal judge does, the responsibility and the integrity it requires, I'm ashamed I let the confusion persist. You built a successful career, I said. That's nothing to be ashamed of. But I built part of it on a misrepresentation. You built yours on merit, on dedication, on excellence. There's a difference. Sarah took his hand. We both apologize. Marcus for the false impression, and me for not caring enough to learn what you actually do. I forgive you, I said simply. Both of you. My father raised his glass. To Lauren. To the daughter we failed to see clearly. To the judge who showed us what real success looks like. And to family, which should mean supporting each other, not competing for status. We clinked glasses. Over dessert my mother said quietly, Your grandmother would be so proud of you. She was, I said. She told me so at my confirmation. She said I was doing exactly what I was meant to do. She tried to tell us, my mother admitted. She kept saying Lauren is a federal judge. Do you understand what that means? But we thought she was just being, you know how she exaggerated sometimes. She wasn't exaggerating. No, my mother said. She wasn't. 3 months later I was invited to Easter brunch. This time the invitation came with a note from Sarah. Please come. We want to celebrate you properly this time. I attended. My father introduced me to the extended family as my daughter Lauren, a United States District Court judge. He said it with unmistakable pride. An uncle I barely knew approached me. A federal judge? That's incredible. What made you choose that path? I smiled. I wanted to serve justice. To make sure everyone who enters a courtroom gets a fair hearing, regardless of who they are or what they've done. That's beautiful, he said. We should talk more about your work. I'd love to hear about your cases. I'd be happy to share, I said. Though I can't discuss pending matters. Of course. My cousin brought her children over to meet me. Kids, this is your cousin Lauren. She's a judge. Do you know what that means? The youngest, maybe 6 years old, looked up at me with wide eyes. Do you have a hammer? I laughed. A gavel, yes. Would you like to visit my courtroom someday? His eyes got even wider. Really? I'll arrange a tour. Later Marcus found me on the patio. Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me. I mean it. After everything, after the trial, after all of it. You could have held a grudge. You could have excluded us the way we excluded you. That's not who I am, I said. I learned a long time ago that revenge doesn't serve justice. Understanding does. Forgiveness does. Moving forward does. You're a better person than I am. I'm just someone who learned to see the bigger picture. We all make mistakes, Marcus. We all let assumptions guide us. What matters is what we do when we realize we were wrong. He nodded. For what it's worth, you were right about the Riverside case. We lost on the merits. The evidence was solid. You gave us every opportunity to present our defense and we couldn't overcome the facts. That's the system working as it should. And you are, without question, the best judge I've ever practiced before. I smiled. High praise from opposing counsel. Earned praise, he corrected. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself genuinely enjoying the gathering. Not because anyone was fawning over my title, but because for the first time in years, my family was actually interested in who I was, not who they thought I should be. My father pulled me aside before I left. Lauren, I have a question. Of course. That text I sent you before Easter last year. When I said your presence would be awkward around Marcus because he was a federal judge. He paused. Did you know then? That he wasn't actually a judge? Yes. And you didn't correct me? No. Why not? I considered the question carefully. Because I was waiting to see how it would play out. I'd spent years watching our family value titles over character, positions over principles, status over substance. I wanted to see if that pattern would continue. If given a choice between supporting me and celebrating someone with an impressive title, which would you choose? He winced. We chose wrong. You chose what you'd been conditioned to value. But Dad, here's the thing. I didn't need you to choose me to validate my worth. My work validates itself. The law I interpret, the justice I serve, the fairness I maintain in my courtroom, that's my validation. Your approval is a gift, not a requirement. When did you become so wise? Probably around the same time I realized that being excluded from family gatherings didn't diminish my value. It just revealed where the family's priorities were. He pulled me into a hug. I'm so proud of you. I should have said that 10 years ago. I should have said it every day since. But I'm saying it now and I'll keep saying it for as long as I can. I believe you, I said. And Dad? That means something. I drove home that evening feeling lighter than I had in years. Not because my family finally recognized my success, but because I'd learned something important about myself in the process. I didn't need their recognition to know my worth. I'd built my career, my reputation, and my life on principle, not approval. I'd chosen the harder path, public service over private profit, integrity over image, and I'd done it without regret. The fact that they finally understood was simply the completion of a circle that had started with exclusion and ended with recognition. But I would have been fine either way. That's the thing about true success. It doesn't require an audience. It doesn't need validation. It simply exists, steady and certain like justice itself. Monday morning, I returned to my chambers, put on my robes, and prepared for another week of cases. Another week of interpreting the law, maintaining fairness, and serving justice. Another week of being exactly who I was always meant to be. And in Courtroom 4B of the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, under the seal that reads Equal Justice Under Law, I took my seat at the bench. All rise. Court is now in session. The end. 5 years later, I was nominated to the United States Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. My family attended the confirmation hearing. All of them. My father testified as a character witness, speaking with tears in his eyes about the daughter he'd failed to see clearly for so many years. I was confirmed unanimously. At the celebration dinner, my niece, now 11 years old, Asked if she could intern in my chambers when she was older. I want to be a judge like you, she said. Someone who's fair and who doesn't care about what people think, just about what's right. I looked at her and smiled. Then that's exactly what you'll be. Because that's the real legacy. Not the title, not the position, not the recognition. But the example that fairness, integrity, and justice matter more than approval. And that success isn't about being seen by others. It's about seeing yourself clearly and choosing to be exactly who you're meant to be.